These craft would spend 2 solitary years on Mars, allowing NASA to test all of the systems before sending a human crew. Then, in the 3rd year, 3 more ships would launch, this time with the HAB occupied by astronauts. The other 2 ships are for a future mission, unless needed as a backup for this crew. Once on Mars, the team could also utilize the first HAB. Then, after a 1.5-year stay, the crew would climb aboard their small capsule and rendezvous with the return ship. This ship would carry them back home in a roomier environment than Zubrin's ERV. Zubrin called the plan Mars Semi-Direct. NASA called it the Design Reference Mission.
They had a larger crew than we had. They had bigger ships. They had more equipment. They had heavier equipment. So they had to do the mission in 3 launches instead of 2, but it was done with the same principles of Mars Direct.
The plan was subjected to the same cost analysis that tagged the 90-day report with a $450 billion price tag. The Design Reference Mission came back at a fraction of the cost, $55 billion. Spread out over 10 years, it could be done within NASA's existing budget. The plan made the cover of Newsweek. Here was a mission architecture that was affordable and could be done today with existing technology. But NASA's astronauts have not left low Earth orbit since. With the completion of the International Space Station and the retiring of the Space Shuttle program, a debate rages over the future of space exploration. Should NASA continue to focus on low Earth orbit, developing technologies for the future? Or should NASA have a goal, like it did in the 1960s with Apollo?
The way we got to the moon was by a presidential imperative that demanded that NASA get to the moon within a decade. So NASA was forced to sit down, design a plan for how to do that, and then fly the mission. Since that time, without the presence of a driving imperative, we engage in basically a random set of constituency-driven programs which are justified ad hoc afterwards by the argument that they could prove useful at some time in the future when you actually have a plan to go somewhere.
I think NASA has focused on a steady process where the government can't just pull the plug on their funding. I think the Apollo cancellation was very traumatic for NASA, and it really transformed NASA from what it was in the 60s to more of what it is now. If you have a singular program like going to Mars, then it is very vulnerable to having its funding pulled.
NASA must be destination-driven. It is the only thing that allows the agency to be productive. NASA was 100 times more productive when it was destination-driven than in the period that it has not been. And we have stagnated in NASA since 1973. 30 years, more than a generation, has been wasted. The American space program's been stagnant for 30 years. There's a once-in-a-generation shot right now to get it moving again by giving it a goal that'll take it somewhere. So the stakes today are high. And if you ask me if I am nervous right now, I am.
Dr. Zubrin.
Why is NASA stuck in low Earth orbit? The problem with NASA's lack of current achievement is not money. The problem is lack of focus, it's lack of a goal. It shouldn't be humans to Mars in 50 years. It should be humans to Mars in 10. We can do this. We do not need gigantic nuclear electric spaceships to send people to Mars. That is pork, it's nonsense. The primary question I get from the American people is, why aren't we doing this? There's a big sense of disappointment, almost verging on a sense of betrayal. The purpose of spaceships is to actually travel across space and go to new worlds, not to hang out in space and observe the health effects from doing so.
Dr. Zubrin, in your testimony, you were very passionate, but you also were mad. You're mad we haven't done this, or that this vision has been stolen from a generation?
I guess you could say that. It's like Columbus coming back from the New World and Ferdinand and Isabella saying, ah, so what, forget it, burn the ships. Okay, you know, that's what has happened in this country. We've won our point that there needs to be a destination. What we need, the point we need to win on now is that the destination needs to be Mars, and it needs to be soon.
The movement to send humans to Mars in the near term began at the University of Colorado in 1978. A graduate student in astrogeophysics named Chris McKay gave a small seminar on the possibility of introducing life to Mars.
I got interested in Mars in graduate school. I entered graduate school the same year that Viking landed on Mars and sent back these images, and it sent back data that showed all the elements needed for life are here on this planet, and yet there's no life here. I thought, oh, that's odd. It's sort of the lights are on and nobody's home. And I thought, well, that's curious. So some of my other grad students and I, we sort of got together to talk about, well, if there's no life on Mars now, could we put life there? And that evolved also into the question, well, maybe there was life in the past, and so we could find fossils, evidence of it. Well, how would you do that? Well, you do that by sending people there.
Together with fellow graduate students, the group decided to put together a small conference to discuss the matter of human Mars exploration.
We basically just started a forum. We invited everybody from all the NASA centers and from all the universities that were involved in it, and they all came. And it really was, in retrospect, I realized a very important step toward building a consensus for human exploration of Mars.
In 1996, I published my first book, The Case for Mars, and the response was phenomenal. I got 4,000 letters from all over the world. I had Parisian bankers and 12-year-old kids in Poland and firemen from Saskatoon and astronauts, and they're all writing me and saying, how do we make this happen?
Bob Zubrin came to the third Mars conference and got very much involved. And he was willing and interested in forming a society, forming a group and organizing.
He said, look, if we could pull these people together, if we can get them to work together, we could have a force that could actually make humans to Mars happen.
The group formed the Mars Society. Robert Zubrin became the president. They held their first convention in 1998.
The convention was just magic. We had no idea how many people were coming. They were there not just from the United States and Canada and Europe. They were there from Israel. They were there from Mozambique. They were there from New Zealand. It was astonishing.
Since its inception, the Mars Society has attracted members worldwide. Derek Shannon is the head of the Southern California chapter. He's met with political leaders from all over the country.
If you make them look at the whole Mars vision in historical terms, it becomes a much easier sell. How will the Martians remember our century? They're probably not going to remember our deficit, our wars, our healthcare. Those will be footnotes. What they'll remember is that out of all of human history, there came a generation that decided to take this amazing step out into space. And if you tell politicians that they're the ones whose names actually get to be remembered, that's when, hopefully, the space program starts going somewhere.
In order to further the knowledge necessary for a manned mission to the Red Planet, the Mars Society has been building research stations around the globe, all of them based on the design of Zubrin's HAB module. Most recently, the Society set up a desert research station in Utah. Here, international researchers and aerospace students come to do experiments under the harsh desert conditions and learn what's necessary to keep a Mars crew alive and productive.
Basically, what we're doing here is undergoing analog studies. Crews of up to 6 people at a time come together to live in a full simulation environment for up to 14 days. So what that means is every time we go outside the HAB, people have to don spacesuits. They have to depressurize. When we go outside, they're called extravehicular activities. They can only be of a certain duration due to the air supply. We have to recycle all our water and basically have our own food as well.
It's great to fantasize, but it's another thing when you have to put it together, when the nuts have to fit the bolts.
Like the Apollo missions to the Moon, sending human beings to Mars will mean putting people in harm's way. There are many dangers in outer space, and many things could go wrong. A serious equipment breakdown could doom the crew to their deaths. Some argue that the risk of failure is simply too high.
You know, back in the days when medieval man was looking out from Europe and thinking about exploring the world was unknown, and map makers populated their maps with dragons. We've got the same thing today. There are people who are afraid to go out into space, and they've populated their maps of the solar system with dragons. You know, we've got cosmic radiation, we've got zero gravity, we've got back contamination. But these are dragons that we can take on.
There are two kinds of radiation astronauts must contend with in outer space: solar flares and cosmic rays. Solar flares are floods of protons that burst from the sun at irregular intervals and would be dangerous to an unshielded human crew.
We are not ready to send humans to Mars right now. We've got to know a lot more about radiation and radiation mitigation. One of the Apollo flights barely missed, like by a week, a major solar event. If it had gone off when the Apollo astronauts were on the way back and forth to the moon, they would have gotten their entire lifetime radiation dose in that one mission. And that's just one solar flare. So that's why we worry about this.
In the Mars Direct plan, Zubrin envisions a central, insulated core where a crew can retreat to while the radiation passes by. The core would be surrounded by all the provisions of the mission. This should stop any harmful dose of radiation from reaching the astronauts.
Basically, you use your pantry as your storm shelter. So a solar flare happens, the alarm bell rings, the crew goes into the storm shelter, they stay in there cramped up pretty tight for a few hours until the all clear rings and they come out. This is going to happen once, it might happen twice in the course of the mission.
The second type of radiation is cosmic rays. This constant rain of charged particles comes from interstellar space and cannot be avoided without many meters of shielding. We can experience some of this type of radiation on Earth at high altitudes. Airline pilots who spend their careers flying high in the atmosphere can receive almost as much of this radiation throughout their life as a Mars astronaut would on a 2.5-year mission.
It's a long trip. It's a 6-month trip there, a 6-month trip back. It's probably a year on the surface. That's a lot of radiation.
The best estimates are that the magnitude of that dose is not that great, perhaps 60 rem of radiation scattered over 2.5 years. Now, 60 rem of radiation delivered over a long period of time like that would not create any noticeable effects at all. It would, though it is believed, increase your statistical risk of getting cancer at some point later in your life by about 1%. Right now, if you're an average American and you do not smoke, you have a 20% chance you're going to die of cancer. This would make it 21. If you're an average American smoker, it's 40. So in fact, if you recruited the Mars crew out of smokers and sent them to Mars without their tobacco, you would be reducing their chance of getting cancer.
With the immense distance from Earth, never before experienced by a human being, with the constant dangers of outer space surrounding their small, life-sustaining craft, and with nowhere else to go, the psychological impact on a crew could be severe.
Fear is real. I mean, it would be, to me, abnormal for a person to not feel the fear of getting on a rocket and launching into space and going to Mars. So I think fear is a very normal thing that all astronauts, in fact, are supposed to have. And I would be afraid to fly with someone who does not have fear.
Some psychologists worry that cabin fever could set in, and the crew might literally go crazy.
The human Mars mission is a more rigorous and difficult condition than most of us experience in daily life. But it is hardly a more difficult situation than many people have endured throughout human history. We could compare the Mars crew to the crew of 19th century or prior sailing vessels, many of whom were away from home for 3 years or more than 3 years, under conditions in which they're eating extremely bad food, without any medical knowledge to support their health, commanded by brutal officers. In every respect, the crew of the human Mars mission, with the full support of mission support and the whole world cheering for them and great rewards awaiting for them in life upon their return, is in a vastly superior condition.
The Mars Direct crew will spend most of their time inside the 2-story hab, carefully designed to promote psychological well-being despite the confinement.
The space where I think everybody would spend the most time, just like a lot of homes on Earth, would be the galley wardroom area. There would be chairs, a table, some kind of large screen for entertainment. You would have individual staterooms about 4 or 5 feet wide. The ability for them to communicate with loved ones, with colleagues on Earth, I think will be almost unlimited.
A Mars crew will need to be carefully chosen and thoroughly tested to ensure their ability to handle the extreme isolation.
Wow, what a place! What a view, isn't it, John? It's absolutely unreal.
John Young, who went to the moon, used to say that he could cover the Earth by just lifting his thumb up to it. And he says that when you go to Mars, you are going to redefine the concept of loneliness. And so it is very important that the crew be well balanced and well chosen so that they can support each other.
Whoever gets picked to go, they will have to learn to live together for 2.5 years.
If you put out a call for volunteers for the first crew to Mars, they'd be lined up coast to coast. Most people recognize what's left after you go is the good you left behind. And to take part in a venture of this character, such a historic character of extending the reach of the human species, this is something of immortal significance. One of the most bogus threats associated with the Mars mission is the so-called back contamination issue, which is this notion that you go to Mars and discover these virulent disease organisms that you bring back to Earth and destroy all life on Earth.
If we discover life on Mars, one fear is that our Earth biology will have no defense against possible Martian pathogens. Some argue that missions to Mars cannot be risked until we can prove Mars is free from harmful contaminants.
This is completely nonsensical. There's natural transfer of material from Mars to Earth all the time. We get around 500 kilograms of unsterilized Martian rocks landing on Earth every year, and they have been doing so for the past 3-4 billion years. And so if there were Martian organisms that could contaminate the Earth, they've already done so.
Although the prospect of Martian diseases seems remote, lawmakers have required that NASA create elaborate protocol to ensure that any extraterrestrial material stays contained. And like the Apollo astronauts, who spent 17 days in quarantine after their return from a sterile moon, a Mars crew will have to be thoroughly tested for any harmful Martian pathogens.
The probability is infinitesimally tiny, but nevertheless, this is our home planet and it's extremely important and we have to protect it.
The idea of a pathogen on Mars is clearly ridiculous because there is no megafauna or megaflora on Mars for pathogens to infect. So it is impossible to propose a credible life cycle for a Martian pathogen. The diseases that afflict us have been co-evolving with us and our ancestors and near relatives for the past 3 billion years, and they are specifically designed to live inside the habitat of the human body and to overcome its defenses, and they've been engaged in an arms race with the human defenses for those 3 billion years. This is why humans do not get diseases from distantly related species. For example, I don't know of any person who has ever contracted Dutch elm disease. You know, and trees don't get colds.
When the first Mars lander touches down, the crew will be staring out at a new world, a place that in 4 billion years, no eyes have ever seen. The crew won't be alone. Millions of television viewers back home will be watching as the first man or woman places their footprint into the rust-colored soil. The crew will savor these moments, for here, someday, a new branch of civilization might begin, and future Martians will remember and celebrate this day. There is much for the crew to do and explore. One of their main mission objectives will be to search for signs of microscopic life. To do this, they will follow the ancient water flows. For on Earth, where there is water, there is life. To help the crew in their search, they will have a pressurized rover that allows them to explore in a comfortable shirt-sleeve environment. This means the crew can examine a vast area around the landing site during their 18-month stay. And there is much to explore. Mars has 58 different kinds of topography and a surface area equivalent to all the continents of Earth combined. If these explorers can uncover the fossilized remnants of indigenous Martian life, they will redefine mankind's understanding of its place in the universe. For if life arose separately on a planet so close to our own, it strongly suggests that the universe is a biologically rich place and full of life. For some, the ultimate question of Mars, though, is will there be human settlements on the planet? Will Mars become a new branch of human civilization? As each subsequent Mars mission explores a wider and wider area of the planet over several years, an ideal site for a base will be found, probably one with a thermal vent that can supply water and power. At that point, several HABs will be landed in this one spot, with crews that plan to stay for 4, 8, or even 12 years. The HABs will be interconnected, and a permanent human presence on Mars will be established. This scientific community will have to learn to become self-sufficient, to be able to survive on Mars without supplies constantly being sent from Earth. But unlike any other planet in the solar system besides Earth, Mars has all of the fundamentals needed to make this possible. Its 24-hour and 37-minute day is critical for growing plants. It has all of the elements necessary for creating building materials like plastics, metals, and glass. And it has oceans of water frozen into the soil.
If we can develop this craft of living on Mars, then Mars becomes inhabitable. Not immediately physically, but intellectually. I mean, look, what determines whether an environment is habitable or not? Is Colorado habitable? We're not naturally adapted to live in Colorado. We're tropical animals. No one could survive a single winter night here without technology, such as clothing, efficient use of fire. We invented our way into becoming people that could colonize such hostile environments.
Eventually, with a lot of ingenuity and invention, the scientists will learn to live off the land. They will grow crops in the iron-rich but potassium-poor soil. And they will produce oxygen and energy from the water and atmosphere. Sooner or later, children will be born, the first true Martians. They will grow up to see Mars as their home. With time, more and more people will arrive. These won't only be scientists, but settlers, people who plan to stay. They may come for all kinds of reasons, but to them, Mars will be a chance to start over, to build a new life for themselves.
The well of human social thought is not exhausted by the present age, and I don't think will ever be exhausted. There will always be people with new ideas on how humans should live together.
With Mars so far away, the hold of Earth governments on their colonies will be tenuous. The Martians will need to govern themselves.
Mars is not going to be a utopia. Mars is going to be a lab. It's an open frontier. It's a place where things are going to be tried out. I think we'll see a lot of noble experiments on Mars. Perhaps some of these Martian colonies with their novel ideas based on the best thought the 21st century has to offer, maybe they'll find ways in which humans create society that are more humane and offer more opportunity for human potential.
The ultimate dream of the Martians will be to terraform their planet, to make Mars as hospitable as Earth. This may not be as big a fantasy as it seems.
Here we are on Earth, a world that's very sophisticated and developed and complete. And anything we do is just a subtraction. It's because we live in such a biologically rich planet. When we go to Mars, we have an opportunity that we don't have on Earth. Here's a planet that's died. Here's a world that's not full of biology, probably doesn't have any at all. Well, there, we can actually do something to help.
Once there are large human settlements on Mars that have significant industrial capability, we could actually start addressing ourselves to the question of transforming the Martian environment itself, terraforming Mars, as it's called, because Mars was once a warm and wet planet, and it could be made so again through human engineering efforts.
With daytime temperatures in the Martian tropical zone averaging around 0 degrees centigrade, and with an atmosphere only 1% as thick as Earth's, exposure to these elements by a human without a spacesuit would be instantly fatal. The first step to terraforming Mars and bringing it back to life will be for the Martian colonists to warm up their planet.
Well, we know how to warm up planets. We're doing it on Earth by putting gases in the atmosphere. On Earth, it's not a good idea to warm up the planet. The temperature is just fine, thank you. We don't need it any warmer here. But in principle, if you could trap the sunlight reaching Mars today, every single photon that's hitting Mars, Mars would warm up in about 10 years. Well, obviously you can't trap every single photon that's hitting Mars, but you can trap about 10% of them with the greenhouse effect. So that would imply that Mars could warm up in about 100 years. Well, 100 years is a long time, but it's not astronomically long.
One idea is to build small, automated factories that produce super greenhouse gases with no ozone-depleting side effects. Although these gases would be unwelcome on Earth, for the Martians they would be an efficient way to trap heat.
Then within a few decades, we would raise Mars by more than 10 degrees centigrade. And if you did that, that would cause massive amounts of carbon dioxide that is currently absorbed into the Martian soil to start to outgas.
Carbon dioxide is also a natural greenhouse gas. As it builds up in the atmosphere, more and more heat will be trapped, which will in turn cause more CO2 to outgas. The process will become automatic, and as the atmosphere thickens, Mars will eventually reach a state of equilibrium and stay warm naturally. The rise in air pressure would mean that the human colonists could discard their pressure suits and walk around the surface of Mars carrying only a supply of oxygen. And as the temperatures rise on Mars, water frozen into the soil will begin to melt out. And for the second time in its history, Mars would have liquid water on its surface. Dry Martian rivers will start to flow. seas will rise, and there will be rain clouds in the skies. The return of Mars to its warm and wet stage will make it a fertile environment for life. Any indigenous Martian organisms lying dormant will begin to grow, and Mars will be full of Martians. If no native life emerges, or that life is all dead, then humans could begin addressing the idea of bringing life from Earth. At first, it would be simple organisms, perhaps genetically engineered, that would thrive in the Martian environment. Then more complex plants could be introduced. The plants would be right at home in the carbon dioxide atmosphere, and with no competition and a whole planet to cover, they could transform Mars into a green world. Warming Mars so that it sustains life is rapid, but then the slow process of making the atmosphere breathable for humans and animals starts, and that's done by plants. Although the process will happen naturally, if the colonists can't find a quicker way, it will take tens of thousands of years.
This is a philosophical debate. Many people think the universe has a big sign on it that says, "Do not touch. Leave it alone. It was made this way. It is not in our purview as human beings to change anything." I can respect that view, although I disagree with it. I think the universe has a big sign on it that says, "Go forth and spread life." Because when I look around the universe, I think life is the most amazing thing we see. It is just incredible. And we human beings are uniquely positioned to help spread life from this little tiny planet, which it seems to have been started on, beyond. And that's our gift. Earth's gift to the universe, I think, is the gift of life.
This scheme for terraforming Mars is based on 20th century notions of engineering. I don't think it is how Mars will actually be terraformed. What you have here is a 20th century mind trying to address a 22nd century problem. And so I think Mars will be terraformed by the 23rd century, not by the 33rd, by the 23rd. Things that would seem utterly fantastical to us is how it will actually be done, but it'll be done. We're at a crossroads today. We either muster the courage to go or we risk the possibility of stagnation and decay.
The exploration of the solar system and expanding of life through the rest of our solar system and someday beyond is the kind of thing that will keep our civilization going.
We're explorers by nature. Eventually we will go to the stars. And the question is, when will we start?
I think a man-Mars mission could happen within 15 years.
Some days I'm very optimistic. I think we can do it in 10, maybe 15 years. Other days I see all the political things that go into the space program. I look back on the 30 years we've been bogged down, and I get more negative about it, and I say it's going to be another 3 decades or 4 decades.
I would be surprised if we got to Mars prior to 2025 or 2030.
In May of 2018.
Understanding the various political obstacles that exist and what we need to fight through to get the program started, I believe that we will be on Mars by 2020. You have to believe in hope. You have to believe in the future. There are more and more people coming around to the point of view that a positive future for humanity requires human expansion to space. We will eventually break through the forces of inertia that have been holding this thing back.